Welcome to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have real, honest, smart, and sometimes even hilarious conversations about co-parenting, separation, and divorce, and all that goes along with that. I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, certified life and relationship coach, and happily divorced mom who helps women decide if they should stay in or leave their marriages and then guides them through the process one step at a time. Hey everyone, happy end of summer to you. Most of your kids probably went back to school like weeks ago. My son doesn't go back till after Labor Day, so we are winding it down. I'm going to jump in today because I have a great episode for you. I brought on a very special guest named Jason Levoy. Jason is a former divorce attorney turned divorce coach who helps people navigate the divorce process from an attorney's point of view. He works with both people who have attorneys and those who don't. He's the creator of the most comprehensive online divorce coaching resource on the internet called Divorce U, which we will talk about in this episode. And I think we're just going to dive into it because there is so much rich information here. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Kate.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I am excited to have this conversation. I have not yet had a legal conversation on my podcast. I've talked about the legal system. I've talked about some of the issues that I see in the legal system, but I have not actually had an expert in the legal system on my podcast. So you are the very first.
I'm very honored, and now you've put a lot of pressure on me.
Get it all right, would you?
Right. When you say expert, I look around the room. I'm like, what?
Who's she talking about? That's you. Will you give us a little background about where you come from? You were a divorce attorney, right?
That is true. In my former life.
In your former life. Tell us a little bit about your journey in that and out of that and where you are now.
Sure. I had a career before I became an attorney. I won't bore everybody with that, but I was in corporate communications. I was going to be a writer for TV film. I was in graduate school out in Southern California. I was going to be, an entertainer, so to speak. I'm from back east, New Jersey. I decided after living in California for a couple of years that I did not want to live in California for the majority of my life.
Hey, now watch it. You know that's where I live, right?
I know. And it's beautiful. Something about palm trees in November, December. I don't know.
It's pretty rad. But I did grow up in New York. So I don't know if I told you that, but I did grow up in New York City. So I get it.
Yeah, you get it. I love the change of seasons. I don't know. It's just... I'm an East Coaster. What can I say? Don't hate me.
I don't.
So I moved back home to the East Coast, and I got into communications, and I thought that was the road I was going in. Then law school and being an attorney was always an itch that I just had to scratch. And so I had the opportunity to go, and I just bit the bullet and went. And when I went to law school, I actually went with the design and intent to practice matrimonial law and become a divorce attorney, which is odd. Most people don't really do that.
Why was that what you wanted to focus on?
That is a very good question. I have to say, in all honesty, it probably stems from my upbringing. Mm-hmm. I'm the middle of three brothers. So you could say maybe I have a little middle child syndrome going. I was always the mediator in my family.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Did your parents stay together or did they get divorced?
No, they stayed together.
They stayed together, but you were the mediator, but as being the middle child.
Right. I just kind of fell into that role. And not only the mediator between my parents, but the mediator between my brothers and my parents. And, in the rare times when I was actually involved with, a dispute or something going on, then obviously I wasn't the mediator. Somebody else had to step in. But they weren't necessarily the mediator. They were just like the referee.
Right.
But I think that had a lot to do with it, in all honesty, because I always wanted to help kind of diffuse situations and just help people like get past whatever it was they couldn't get past of.
Got it. Okay.
And so that's why I went to law school. And after law school, that's what I did. I practiced divorce law for a number of years. And then after doing that, I realized that was something I didn't want to do for the rest of my life either, because I got into that whole line of work to actually help people, and I wasn't helping people, or I didn't feel like I was helping people. And
why was that? Was that because you were more mediating disputes than creating something healthy, happy? What was it that made you not feel like you were helping people?
Well, I can give you, if we have time, I'll give you a little story about it.
Yeah.
Because this was literally the catalyst for what I do today. I was in my office. I was working at a small firm, a matrimonial firm in New Jersey, and I was on the phone. I had this one case, two young couples, or one couple. Well, they were young, and I represented the wife, and the husband had an attorney, and I actually got along with the attorney just fine. But these people were arguing over who was going to pick up the child. They shared one child together, and they were arguing and paying me to spend hours over who was going to pick this child up on a Saturday morning, versus like 10 o'clock versus 12 o'clock. I mean, hours, Kate. And, attorneys typically charge at an hourly rate, right? So hours on this one little issue. And I finally got to the point. I hung up the phone. I remember it like it was yesterday. I hung up the phone, put my hands up in the air, and I said, there's got to be a better way. I can't do this for the rest of my life. It's not fair to anybody, including me. Because I have these people that I have to charge now hundreds of dollars, and sometimes we'll get into thousands of dollars on this one trivial, at the time, it was a trivial issue in the scheme of things. And that's when it just hit me that, this is not the way it should be working. So I got out. I literally quit. I quit practicing divorce law. And even to this day, I don't represent anybody directly in the divorce anymore.
Okay. And so what do you do now?
So now I do divorce coaching, which, you're very familiar with, and many of your listeners are familiar with. But I do divorce coaching slightly different than most other people do it. I do it from a legal perspective, from an attorney's point of view,
which I think makes it really unique, right? I think that there are divorce coaches that cover lots of aspects, right? I work on the sort of psycho-emotional and logistical and strategic, and you do strategy as well, but really from the legal perspective.
Right. I mean, I kind of cover, everything, and a lot of it blends together, but as an attorney, I can offer, a unique perspective on things and coach people in a different way than somebody who's not an attorney.
Right.
And so that's the focus of what I do now. And I find it so much more satisfying because I actually am helping people. And, it's funny, I got into it starting to help people I thought who couldn't afford attorneys because there were a lot of them out there. And I know they need help. But it's funny, I work with a lot of people who actually have attorneys and they want to work with me for different reasons. But I never really thought that would be the case.
Interesting. And so what do you do with the people who have attorneys? How do you work with your clients?
Well, the first thing I do is I make sure not to undermine whatever their attorney is advising them on.
Yeah.
Unless they're really asking me or they're questioning what their attorney is doing and they're coming to me for a clear second opinion, that's a different story. But my motto is, hey, if you can afford an attorney, hire one, because I'm not a substitute for that. Even though I am an attorney, I'm not your attorney.
Right.
So, go out and get one. And if you want to supplement me with that, that's fine. I'm a lot cheaper than your attorney's hourly rate because I don't charge hourly. And so a lot of people use me kind of in between big ticket items in their divorce, whether it's hearings or, they just want to bounce something off of me. I'm very accessible. And so they like that relationship. But basically I really try to not to interfere with whatever their attorney is doing with them too.
We've talked a little bit about this, but so what do you feel like are the pitfalls of the legal system, sort of the most common pitfalls of the legal system that people should look out for? Let's say if you've got somebody who's about to go into this, and what would you tell them to look out for?
Well, do we have 3 hours?
We could turn it into a 3-parter.
Yeah, right. We might have to. There's a lot of stuff to cover, but I'll touch on a couple. I think one of the biggest pitfalls people do is if they have an attorney, they don't choose the right one for their case. And a lot of people might think that's obvious, or they overlook it. There's a lot of attorneys out there. And just like everything else in life, there's good ones and there's bad ones. And so you need to pick the right one for your case. You can't just, pick the person your friend had or your family member had in their divorce blindly. I always tell people, go on more than one, more than two, at least 3 consultations before you choose your attorney, because that's a big deal. And it's going to cost you a lot of money. Even a cheaper attorney is going to cost you a lot of money. And so you want to pick somebody right and who you're comfortable with. And there's a lot of kind of sub issues that go into choosing the right attorney.
Yeah.
First of all, you got to be comfortable with the person, right? I always tell people, like, your relationship with your attorney is like a relationship with anybody else. It's an interpersonal relationship. So you got to be comfortable with that person. You got to kind of vibe off of each other. You want to make sure you have the same kind of personality. You want to make sure you have the same values. You want to make sure that you have the same perspective on how to handle conflict.
Yes. That's so important.
Yeah. And people don't think about that when they're choosing their attorneys. They're either looking for a big name or just picking a recommendation blindly. But you really want to interview that person and feel comfortable with that person, because that can really set the tone and set your divorce on the right track or the wrong track.
Yeah. And something that just occurred to me is that even if you get a recommendation from someone, right, because maybe the attorney got them a great settlement or something, I would think it would be important to ask, how was the process?
Exactly. It's not the outcome. I can't tell you how many times I tell this to people. I've put this in articles. I say this in interviews all the time. Do not compare your divorce with anybody else's.
Right.
Divorces are like snowflakes. No two are alike. You really have to understand that. Your friend who got divorced and is in your ear, use them for support and encouragement. But whatever happened in their divorce, your life is different than theirs. You have different assets, different jobs, different kids. Everything is different.
And they may have gotten a great settlement, but they also may have had a process that dragged their kids through the ringer, that, actually cost them more, that was emotionally turbulent. Right? So you want to, don't just go for whatever somebody's outcome, but go for, how was their process? Did they feel safe? Did they feel taken care of? Did they feel like their needs were met, that their concerns were heard, right?
That is such a good point, Kate. It's the focus. Yes, the outcome is important, obviously, but the focus is on the process, because the process leads to the outcome. And so, divorces are not decided on a formulaic basis. Otherwise everybody's divorce would be put into a calculator and there would be no contested divorces and big issues. It doesn't work like that. So it's about the process. And right, if you have children, is there going to be an issue with custody? And if so, then you need an attorney who can handle that in the way that you want it to be handled. Right. And that's a different story, because if you want it to be handled in a very negative and high conflict manner, well, that's a different conversation that we have to have. Yeah. Right.
That's a conversation we have to have, because listeners of my podcast know how I feel about that. So
yeah. And I don't represent people. I don't represent people anymore anyway, but when I did, I wouldn't represent that person.
Right.
And like I said, we could have a whole conversation on why, but yeah, you got to understand the process. And that's why you want to make sure your attorney is the right attorney for you. There's different types of attorneys. There's litigators and then there's non-litigators.
Right.
And for those who don't know, a litigator just means somebody who likes to go to court all the time. And going to court all the time is not a good thing if you want a quick and cheap divorce and want to try to negotiate and do things amicably. So, if you have a litigator for an attorney, then it's going to be a long and expensive process.
Yep, absolutely. I think I've told this story on the podcast before, and I think I told you this when we spoke before, is that I did a collaborative process, and collaborative divorce is something else entirely. And I think it's great.
Yep.
I think it's one of the best processes out there if you can collaborate. But it's sort of one step more collaborative, for lack of a better word, than mediation. And it's, our collaborative attorney was on a panel once with a bunch of litigators, and he turned to the litigators at one point and he said, "So how do you guys know when to stop litigating?" And they said, "When the money runs out."
Oh, I was going to say, can I guess? And that's what I was going to say.
Shit, sorry.
Yes, when the money runs out.
When the money runs out. Yep, we're going to keep litigating this. And then when the money runs out, when we can't make any more money off of it, then we'll quickly find a solution that probably was available months and tens of thousands of dollars ago.
Can I tell you a quick story?
Please.
Because it boggles my mind, or it doesn't, I don't know which is more disappointing. But
right.
I was in an office, and obviously I'm not going to name any names, but when I was practicing representing people, there was an attorney in my office who got a new file, a new case came in the door, and I heard her talking. She knew the other spouse's attorney as well, because in divorce land, attorneys, it's typically a small circle, and so many divorce attorneys know each other. So she called up her colleague, who was also, I would say, / friend, and I heard them talking about this new case, and the conversation pretty much was summed up like this: "Oh yeah, this is going to be a good case. They have some money. Let's make sure that, we get paid on this file." If it wasn't clear enough, at least to me, being an attorney meant they're going to drag it out long enough for most of that money to be used up, and then they'll both agree and settle and move on to the next one,
Yep.
And I remember my tongue was practically on the floor.
Yep.
Because you hear things, and you hear stories, and you see there's movies made about it and everything, but to actually be firsthand, to hear that out in the open, I was just I couldn't believe it, and that was another signal to me that this is not going to work out for me.
Yeah. So one of the pitfalls of the legal system is litigation.
It really is.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have no choice, but if you can stay out of the court system, that is preferable. Absolutely.
How do you so I know how I work to keep people out of the litigation. And for me, that is really an emotional process. I help, and unfortunately, I wish I could do it with both parties in the divorce process, but I really only tend to do it with the women. But what I do is I work with people to get past their blame and resentments and move forward from forgiveness and I sometimes I say neutrality. I don't think that's the right word. I got to find a better word. But it's the peace and the calm that comes after the storm when you've processed through it all, where there's acceptance and you're not angry anymore. And one of the things that I often talk about is the fact that, in the U.S., in other countries, there's a 2-year waiting period. In some other countries, I think Brazil has it, the UK has it, and I don't know of other countries that do. But there's a 2-year mandatory waiting period from the date of separation to the date you can begin filing for divorce.
And that gives you this emotional space to heal. And if we all took that space, and what we do here is the marriage blows up and then we go to court. And so we are making the biggest legal and financial decisions of our lives in the midst of the biggest emotional upheaval of our lives. And it's a shit show.
Well said.
So I work with people to heal the emotional, go through the emotional stuff and heal that and come to forgiveness and all of that stuff, right? So that when they go to mediate, it is, at least on their side, it's clearer. There's no anger, there's no blame, there's no resentment, and they can go through the process a lot more cleanly. So how do you help people avoid that trap?
Well, it's funny. I tell this to people too. You know what a divorce really is when it comes down to it, right? A divorce is a business transaction.
Yeah. So is a marriage, by the way.
Right. Yeah. And so the problem is when the emotions get involved.
Yeah.
That's what mucks everything up. So most states now have what's called a no-fault divorce, meaning you don't have to have a reason to get divorced. You can get divorced for any reason. In a lot of states, they call that irreconcilable differences. Before that, there was what you would call fault. You had to, when you filed a complaint for divorce, pick a cause of action such as adultery, or a lot of states would have a time limit like you were just talking about, except it was a lot shorter. It would be like maybe 6 months, 18 months of separation before you can file a complaint for divorce, which sounds good. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I agree with that because I wouldn't want anybody to tell me when it's time for me, and that I have to stay in a marriage or a toxic situation any longer than I can bear.
Stay together. But it's the emotion, the legal ties sort of bind you emotionally, is what you're saying. Is that?
Yeah, sort of. People definitely, I always told my clients, you should be in therapy during the divorce process.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I would make it mandatory because, not because you need it, because you're depressed or, anything like that, but in a contested divorce, you need somebody to objectively help you manage everything that's going on,
Absolutely.
and it can be a lot. So, as an attorney, I don't really have the time to do that. Clients would call me and, I would say, listen, I'm more than happy to talk to you as long as you want. But then when you get the bill at the end of the month, don't come yelling at me.
Right.
I can play.
Yeah, this is a big issue, is that a lot of people use their attorneys as therapists.
Right. And, I minored in psychology. If I wasn't an attorney, I'd probably be a psychologist. But, I'd rather you go to a licensed professional than talk to me. And so I would always do that. But I think it's so important because you need that objective. And I say that very strongly because, friends and family are not objective. And you need that objective voice to help you manage everything that's going on.
Yes. And that's a large part of what I do as well. So I think definitely a therapist or a coach.
Right.
By your side to help you process the feelings as it's happening, and people think, here's the deal. I'm going to say this really clearly, and I think you're going to agree with me. I actually know you are. But here's the deal. A lot of people say, but I'm already paying an attorney. It's a lot of money to pay a coach or a therapist and an attorney at the same time. But here's what Jason and I can both tell you is that having a coach along for the ride will save you money.
Yes.
It will save you money because I'm a lot cheaper than by the hour than your attorney. And if you're calling your attorney with emotional shit, like you're wasting so much money.
Yes.
And they're not qualified. That's not their training. But also it will cut down the duration of the process to have somewhere else to process your emotions.
I agree 100%. And think about it like this, right? Because money, I'm assuming, is important to most people. And if people had a choice, they'd probably want to spend less on their divorce than more. So think about it. Would you rather spend thousands of dollars talking to your attorney, not getting the real help that you need to get through these things? Or do you want to spend less money talking to an additional person on your team? But that's just it. You have to think about it as a team approach. When you get divorced, you need to form your team.
You do.
And that team in an ideal situation should be, in addition to your friends and family, an attorney, a coach, a therapist. And like you said, Kate, a coach and a therapist can overlap in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So, one or the other, if not both. But, right, I understand people not wanting to, or who don't have the resources to spend on, 8 different people. But that's not what we're saying. We're saying in the total circumstances, at the end of the day, you're going to spend less with more people than just using your attorney, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I would add to that list a certified divorce financial, what is it? Certified,
yes, planner.
Divorce planner. What are they called?
Or analyst, a financial analyst or planner.
Yeah, but there's the special one that are certified in divorce, and the
right.
Divorce financial planner, I think is what they're called. I'm going to have one on the podcast soon. And I think that is a super, important piece to have. When you go through collaborative divorce, the collaborative process actually requires all of those pieces. You have an attorney who is the collaborative attorney, and you have you each have a coach, or if you can do it this way. My ex and I actually shared a coach, but if you don't want to do that, you can just each have one.
Right.
A financial person. And it was a process, but it was a team, and we all met together in person however often we did until I don't even remember at this point. It was so long ago, but the team approach was really, I think it was important.
It so is, and it'll make the process go smoother, quicker. And then especially if both sides have their team assembled, that's a perfect situation. And in collaborative, like you said, that's pretty much how it goes.
Yep.
So yeah, I can't stress that enough. Like, picking the right team, getting the right people in place, that's going to help you in the long run.
And it will cost you less. I mean, that's the thing, is that it might it might feel overwhelming and that it's costing more, but it actually in the long run, I think it will cost less.
Absolutely.
What are some other pitfalls of the legal system that you see or that you help people avoid?
Well, since we're kind of talking about attorneys, a big question that I get a lot is, because remember, when I started working with people who didn't have attorneys. And so, the biggest question I get was, well, do I need an attorney for my divorce?
Yeah. Right.
And we kind of talked about that a little bit, but like I tell people, and I think I said this already, if you can afford one, get one. Because a coach is great, but they're not an attorney. It's a different skill set. Even if you use me, who is an attorney, I'm not a substitute for an attorney next to you or somebody to go to court with you. And if you have to argue a motion in front of a judge, I will coach you how to do that, but I'm not going to be there with you. So there's a lot of factors that go into whether you need an attorney or not. Is it going to be a simple divorce or a complicated divorce? Are you a confident person by nature? Do you like public speaking? Or are you an introvert who kind of shies away from that stuff? That's a big factor right there. Does your spouse have an attorney? That's not necessarily a deal breaker, but if your spouse has an attorney, then you might want to really seriously consider getting one for yourself.
Right. Absolutely. Because you don't want to be raked over the coals or sort of outnumbered. Or an out sort of knowledge, right?
Right. It's not going to be fair, no matter how smart or capable you are. An attorney has different training and knows the system better than you, knows the players, the judges, the courtroom. It's just not going to be an even playing field, and that's all you want in a divorce. Really, is an even playing field. And
one of the things that you do is you help people go through as a coach. Part of what you do, because you were an attorney too, is help people, teach them how to advocate for themselves in the court system if they don't have an attorney. Am I right?
Right. That if you don't have an attorney, I pretty much coach you on everything. How you need to act, what you need to say, what kind of evidence you need to present, really the soup to nuts, because you're representing yourself. So I'm trying to dump all my knowledge into your brain, and get you in shape really to do what you need to do to put yourself in the best position to succeed.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about Divorce U?
Sure, I'd love to. Divorce U, which stands for Divorce University, if it wasn't clear. I created that. It's my baby. I created that to be one of the most, if not the most comprehensive, affordable online divorce resource for people who are looking for either a supplement to keep their legal bills down if they have an attorney, or as a fully inclusive resource if you don't have an attorney and you are going through the process, representing yourself. So Divorce U has 3 programs in it: a bachelor's, master's, and PhD program, and depending on what kind of help you really need. So I've created video courses, literally how-to video courses narrated by me that walk you through every step of the divorce process, from beginning to end, from even before you file, just to preparing for divorce, because preparation is so important. And then all the way through a divorce trial, which hopefully you don't have to go through, but if you ever do, I walk you through all of that. So there's video courses, there's divorce forums where people can ask questions, I respond, and then everybody can see all the questions that everybody else is asking and my answers. So, if you have a question about divorce, trust me, somebody else does too. And so the divorce forums is an added resource. And then on top of all that, depending on what program you choose, you get personal one-on-one divorce coaching with me, where we talk about your situation, because again, every divorce is different. And so we do your divorce coaching, and we'll tackle the issues that need to be tackled and figure out and come up with a custom plan to get you through whatever it is that you're going through. And, the goal is to obviously get it done as quickly and cheaply as possible with as little conflict as possible. And, sometimes conflict is unavoidable, but that's when having a coach is so important to kind of work you through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's different kinds of conflict, right? There's strategic and logistical conflict, and then there's emotional conflict. And we often, in the divorce process, we conflate them.
Right.
And we create logistical and strategic conflict out of emotional conflict. And that just doesn't really work it's just not, it's not beneficial.
No.
Right?
Yeah. It's like oil and vinegar.
Yeah. What are some of the things that in clients that you work with, what are some of the top issues that you see over and over and over again that you wish everybody knew?
Oh, wow. People are confused a lot of times with, what they should be trying to present as evidence to kind of not win the argument, but support their position. So, I work with people, a lot with that, if they're trying to get alimony or child support, then, there's a way to go about doing that. You need certain documents. You have to it's like painting a picture for the court or the mediator or whoever it is you're working with trying to resolve the issues. You want to paint them a picture of, the beginning, how you got to the situation and where everybody is now, and what the future, in your opinion, should look like post-divorce. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And so I work with people trying to put that painting together. I deal with, custody issues a lot, parenting time, disputes. That's always a big one. And just getting through the process, understanding how a divorce works, like the nuts and bolts of the process itself. People don't always understand, the different stages of divorce. And so I work with them to kind of prepare them and get them through every stage.
What are the stages as you see them?
So it all starts with before the legal divorce begins. It's the breakdown of the marriage. And so that's what I would just call the preparation stage. You're preparing for divorce. you've decided in your mind that the marriage is no longer reconcilable. And I always encourage people to try to reconcile a marriage if possible, because that's most important. But if you've exhausted those options and you are just know it's time for a divorce, then there's a lot of things that you need to do to prepare for the divorce properly. That's gathering documents, making sure you have emergency contingencies in place in case, God forbid, there's an abuse aspect or domestic violence becomes part of the process, which hopefully doesn't, but you got to be prepared. And so that's why everybody's situation is different. But preparation is one stage. Then you have the actual divorce itself, which encompasses everything from the filing of the complaint for divorce through the discovery phase, the negotiation phase. It's a big phase. I could break that down into, probably 10 different sub phases. But for purposes of, our conversation, that would be like the second stage. And then the third stage is the post-divorce life. What is your life going to look like post-divorce? Are you still going to have communication with your spouse? Do you share children? Are you going to still share assets? How's that going to look? How's that going to work? How are you going to communicate with each other? What if there's a problem? Do you want to have to go back to court, or do you want to have things kind of spelled out as much as possible so you don't have to go back to court? So that's the post-divorce stage.
And that sounds like even the post-divorce stage is sort of set up in the divorce stage, right? And then it
should be set up. Yeah, that's the point. A lot of people kind of neglect the post-divorce because they just want to get divorced and be done with it.
Right. And they don't think about, how do we want to be with each other once we get through this? How do we want to, what kind of relationship do we want to have? For me, again, on the psycho-emotional perspective from the, is that, how do we want to behave in front of our children? What kind of commitment do we want to have to, right? Am I opening the door and letting my kid out like the dog? Or are we agreeing that every time we do an exchange, we're going to have a pleasant conversation? Are we able to do that for the sake of our children?
Exactly. I mean, you can't, I would have the divorce agreements that I would have when I represented people would be about, 50 to 70 pages long. They were not short documents, but it's impossible to anticipate every scenario that could come up and then have that spelled out in writing. So you do the best you can, and you kind of foresee as much as possible for your specific situation. But, things are always going to come up. But the point is, you want to have some sort of idea, if you can, amongst everybody, how are you going to handle situations when they come up? Because they will come up. And then that's the question, is what's going to happen after that? Did I answer the question?
Yes. No, yeah. We were talking about the stages of divorce. Absolutely you did. And it's interesting, right? It is, because you're trying to account for every eventuality, but of course you can't, right? You don't want to think about the fact that, well, what happens if my ex, this is one that I hear a lot. Well, what happens if I start dating someone? Or what happens if he starts dating someone? Don't I get a say in when she meets him, when she meets my kids, right? And you can actually work that into your agreement. My thing is always, if you trust him and if he's a reasonable adult and you trust his choices, then let him make the decision if you trust him as a father. But if you think that there are going to be issues down the line, then put that in the agreement.
Exactly. The issues that you can foresee, include them, because it doesn't hurt to include them. Right. But like you said, you can't possibly foresee everything. And, nobody's life turns out the way they initially planned it. You got to be able to roll with the punches as life goes on, and, having an understanding with your spouse, if possible, on how you are both going to roll with those punches. That's the ideal situation you want.
So you're sort of an advisor, like the work that you do is you sort of advise people on what they should and shouldn't be bringing into their attorney, which is a real money saver.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, it's like having an attorney, but not paying for it.
I know.
Which makes me think, maybe I'm doing this wrong.
We got to rethink your plan here.
Right.
But it is. But you don't have to file the documents. You don't have to deal with, right? You just say, here's what, you should be asking for. And I do think it's invaluable. I really do. I hope people see the value in it. I really hope people see the value in it.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, half the problem, I think, which you pointed out is, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you don't even know the questions to ask. Right. And so I think that's in large part what I help do is I bring up things that if you're not thinking about them, you need to be thinking about them from an attorney's point of view. If you don't have an attorney, and if you have an attorney, then, like I said, people like to talk with me to keep their legal bill down, to make sure that they're comfortable with what their attorney is doing, if they have any doubts or concerns. And, I'm that kind of go-between from those big ticket items and the big hearings, and then when you have to go to court, if you have to go to court. So that's kind of the space that I fill.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I always think about when I got divorced, I consulted a divorce attorney first, just because I wanted to get the lay of the land. That
was very smart.
It was, right? I wanted to understand what my rights were. I knew that we were going to mediate. I knew this is not going to be contentious. I knew that we could get through it, but this was an area I just knew nothing about. And so I consulted an attorney, and the attorney, I've told this story before on the podcast, I'm sure, but I'll tell you now again. The attorney said, I was a stay-at-home mom, so I didn't have any income of my own. And I'm looking at, well, what am I supposed to be mediating for? Right. When we get there, really for me, it was about the financial settlement. I knew that we were going to be 50-50. So it was really about the financial settlement. What was I owed, quote unquote, right, for spousal support and child support. And so in California, the online formula thingy is called a disamaster, right? And you plug in the numbers. You plug in his income, you plug in my income, and you plug in the percentage of custody that you think is you're going to have.
Right.
And so it spit out a number. And I was like, okay, that seems to make sense. And then he said, but now if you were to slide the custody percentage over a little bit and give you more custody, you see how those other numbers go up. And I was like, yeah, but my husband was a fantastic father. My ex-husband now, but he's an amazing father. He's dedicated. He's like, his life is his children.
Right.
And I was like, but I don't, why would I want to take my child away from his father? And it's also like, my son is obsessed with his dad. Why would I come between that?
Right.
And he said, well, so you can get more money.
That's the problem.
And this is another one of the problems, right? This is another one of the pitfalls. And then and here's the thing, but if I didn't know, if I had been a different kind of person, if I don't know, right? I think this is a pitfall that people fall into so easily, is that they go, oh, well, then what do I have to do to get more custody? And then the attorney told me that if we disparaged my husband,
oh God,
if we said that my son wasn't safe with him, or that whatever it was, right, he was going to start weaving a yarn to support me getting more custody, and so that I could get more money, so that he could get more money. And I could just see where this was going. And I was like, I left there and I felt so disgusting.
Yeah. You see, that's a prime example of picking the right attorney.
Absolutely. This was not my attorney, because my commitment was that this was going to be collaborative, that we were going to have 50-50 custody. That wasn't even before he said it. I wasn't going in there going, how much custody should we have? In my world, we were having 50-50 custody. That was just, there was literally no question about it.
Right.
If it could have been 100%, that we would have done that too. But like, it doesn't work that way when you're splitting up a household. I never wanted to be without my son, and I never wanted my husband to be without his son. And so anyway.
What you just described, Kate, is one of the, as a former divorce attorney and just as an attorney, what you just described is one of those scenarios where, it makes me ashamed to be kind of part of that group.
Yeah.
And, that's where all the bad stories come from people like that. And not to say that attorney is a bad person, but that's one of the reasons why I quit, was because if you do this long enough, from what I've seen, the attorneys that do this for 20, 30 plus years, you can't help it. It's just, you just become ingrained. Yeah. It's like the system almost takes you over. That it's automatic. And, if you asked him like, well, what's wrong with you? He'd look at you like, what do you mean what's wrong with me? Right.
Right. Absolutely. It's sort of, and it's even like, it's sort of veterinarians that begin to see animals not as animals. They're just sort of, it becomes a clinical approach, right?
Right.
I think that you lose the humanity. The longer you do something, you become more clinical about something, and the humanity goes out of it. And divorce is such a human-driven experience that's so multi-layered, and I think that is one of the biggest pitfalls. And you and I have talked about the movie Divorce Corp.
Yes.
Which really goes into this. I know you have mixed feelings about it, right?
Divorce Corp?
Yeah.
I think we talked about it. I saw the movie. I thought that it was accurate on a number of things, but it also kind of, embellished or blew up, wasn't so accurate on other things. But all in all, I have to say, there are a lot of problems with the court system, divorce court system today, which is why I encourage, and I'm sure you encourage people to stay out of it if possible.
I really do. And by the way, just to two things. First is that when we say to stay out of the court system and stay out of litigation does not mean to not have an attorney.
Right. No, that's not what we're talking about.
Not what we're talking about. And I feel like I may not be clear enough about that when I talk about this. And I want to be really clear about that actually you do need a divorce attorney.
If you can afford one, get one.
Right. And you may not, and it's not like you need one to file, because the mediator can file for you. You can file for yourself, but get a divorce attorney. We're not against attorneys.
No.
We are against, I think I can speak for both of us, that we're against the litigation system that drags divorces into the spiral like I just talked about. So I think that's an important distinction.
Yes. What did we call it? Litigation doesn't mean you don't need an attorney, or having an attorney doesn't mean you're going to court.
Right. It doesn't, and litigation, avoiding the litigation system does not mean that you're avoiding getting an attorney.
No. Right. An attorney is your coach, your advisor. That's really what they are. So you can have that person and not go to court. And like you said, go to mediate. You can do a collaborative divorce. There's so many different ways to get divorced other than going to court. Right. The attorney and court are not necessarily synonymous.
Right. And just to backtrack a little bit, we were just talking about the movie Divorce Corp. If people haven't seen it and they're like, what the hell are they talking about? It's a documentary that was made about about the litigation system specifically, and about family law. And it's narrated by Dr. Drew. And it's one of those movies that I hate to recommend because it's horrifying. And terrifying. And as Jason pointed out, it embellishes, and it gets a little bit, a little hysterical, I think, about sometimes about, what's the word I want to use? It's a little
dramatic, or no?
A little inflammatory.
Yeah. Well, it's a movie. Let's be honest. It's a movie. So that they were not going to make it not that way. So, it was made to get the conversation going, to kind of get people's juices flowing, if for lack of a better word. And so they made parts of it more, I think, dramatic than the reality is. But like I said, I think it's a good movie for everybody to see.
I do too.
Yeah.
Like, all that being said, I think it's an important movie, and I think that here's the thing: that even the dramatic parts and the parts that are inflammatory are all people's real stories. It's just that it's not the entire picture, right? It's not all that common, but it's like the worst case scenario is if I had gone with this attorney. It's literally the worst case scenario.
Well, wait, everything bad about the process is in the movie.
Exactly. Worst case scenarios across the board. But I think it's important for everyone to see. I actually just had a conversation with someone. I said, have you seen Divorce Corp? And he said, yes. And I even showed it to he had a terrible divorce and his ex-wife, he showed it to her before they got divorced and was like, let's do everything in our power to avoid this. And she still dragged him. She watched it and still dragged him through litigation. And he was like, how could she watch that movie and still just be like, that's nice, dear, and continue on. So, but I do think just watching it, if you have, both people watch it to go, okay, like, we need to avoid this at all costs.
Right. I think Kate and I want to be clear. We want you to watch it with the intent from the perspective of that's not what you want.
Right. Oh my God. Yes. You literally want to watch this to be educated about how this could go and what you want to avoid. And you can see the signs, right? Like if you're educated, then you can see the signs as you go along.
Right.
Yes. That's what we mean.
Just want to be clear.
Good point, Jason. Right. Well, so we're going to have you have a freebie for my people, how to co-parent with an a-hole, which will be linked in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want people to know before we say goodbye?
This was really fun. Thank you again for having me on. Anybody who wants to know more about me, you can find me at jasonlevoy.com. You can learn more about my Divorce U coaching program there. And if you have any questions, you can always just email me and I'll get back to you. It's jason@jasonlevoy.com.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. This was such an important and rich conversation. And I look forward to, Jason and I are going to be cooking some stuff up together behind the scenes. We've been talking about some stuff, so we're going to try and do that somehow, some way.
Yes. We're conspiring. We'll make it happen.
We're going to change the face of divorce together.
Somebody has to do it.
Somebody's got to do it, right? Absolutely. All right, Jason, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks again, Kate. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. You can find me over at kateanthony.com and be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes so you don't miss an episode. See you next time.